Have you ever wondered what you would do if your entire world changed in an instant? One moment, everything is normal. You're at work, your phone buzzing with reminders, your mind cluttered with the mundane tasks of the day. And then, in a heartbeat, something happens that forces you to question everything you thought you knew about life, love, and what it means to be human. That's exactly how it felt when Zara walked into my life. I didn't realize it at first, of course. To me, she was just another part of the experiment, an assignment I was supposed to carry out. But looking back now, I can see that everything changed the moment I met her. She wasn't just any visitor. She wasn't human. And yet, as strange as it sounds, she taught me more about myself than I ever expected. But here's the question that still haunts me. How far would you go to protect the one thing that made you feel truly alive? This is the story of how I found out. Ethan Bennett had always been a man of science. At 32, he was a researcher in one of the world's most advanced extraterrestrial study programs. Working for Vanguard Technologies, a secretive branch of the government, he had witnessed remarkable advances in communication with life forms beyond Earth. But nothing prepared him for the day Zara arrived. The laboratory was bustling when Ethan received the notification. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and when he checked the screen, it simply read, "Project Arrival, Alien Guest." He blinked twice. This wasn't just another experiment. It was the culmination of years of research. Ethan made his way to the facility's docking bay, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and anxiety. He had read the briefing, but it still felt surreal to think that an alien life form would be stepping onto Earth's soil within minutes. The shuttle hummed as it landed smoothly in the bay, a sleek silver vessel unlike anything Earth had ever produced. Its metallic sheen reflected the blinding fluorescent lights of the docking area. As the ramp descended, the air seemed to hum with anticipation. When Zara emerged, Ethan found himself momentarily breathless. She was otherworldly, in every sense of the word. Tall and graceful, Zara had smooth green skin that shimmered subtly under the lights. Her long, flowing hair, a deep shade of blue, cascaded down her back. But it was her eyes, large, almond-shaped, and a stunning hue of violet, that drew him in. They held an intelligence that Ethan immediately recognized, a knowing gaze that seemed to pierce through him. The other scientists gathered around, whispering among themselves, but Ethan was transfixed. He had read about Zara's species, the Altherans, a highly advanced civilization from the far reaches of the galaxy. But seeing one in person was entirely different from studying notes or watching grainy footage. Zara stepped down the ramp with the elegance of a queen. She was calm, composed, and seemingly unaffected by the numerous humans staring at her in awe. Her attire was simple but foreign, silvery fabric that seemed to float around her body, clinging to her in the strangest way, as if it was part of her skin. As Ethan approached, the translator device activated, projecting a soft, clear voice. "Greetings, Earthling. I am Zara." What? Her voice was melodic, with a soothing quality that made everyone in the room instinctively relax. Ethan cleared his throat, suddenly aware that he had been staring. "Welcome, Zara. I'm Ethan, and I'll be working with you during your stay here." Zara's gaze shifted toward him, her violet eyes assessing. "Thank you, Ethan. I look forward to learning from your world. The experiment we are about to conduct is of great importance to my people." The room buzzed with energy, but Ethan couldn't help but feel a pang of nervousness. He had been briefed on Zara's mission, but it was still strange to think that reproduction, human reproduction, was at the center of it. He knew his role was critical, but the details of how it would play out still felt overwhelming. They escorted Zara through the facility, and she walked gracefully, her presence commanding attention. Ethan had been assigned to her as a liaison, both to aid her with scientific experimentation and to help her acclimate to life on Earth. As they reached the living quarters specially designed for Zara, Ethan couldn't help but steal glances at her, trying to wrap his mind around the situation. Later that day, after the initial tour, Ethan sat with Zara in the laboratory's common area, where they could talk more freely. Zara sat across from him, her expression calm, her movements fluid. The translator device, designed to bridge the language gap, hovered nearby, glowing faintly as it interpreted their conversation. "I have reviewed Earth's reproductive methods," Zara began, her tone clinical yet curious. "Your species reproduces in a manner quite different from my own. For the success of this experiment, I need to understand not only the biological mechanisms, but also the emotional factors involved." Ethan felt his heart rate quicken. This was what he had been dreading, the point where the clinical would collide with the personal. Zara's species reproduced through a process of energy transference, entirely devoid of physical intimacy. For them, reproduction was a calculated and scientific endeavor, devoid of the emotions and complexities that humans experienced. "We approach reproduction differently," Ethan replied, keeping his voice steady. "For humans, it's not just about biology. There's an emotional connection involved, a sense of intimacy that transcends the physical process." "Oh!" Zara tilted her head slightly as if considering his words. "Fascinating. On Althara, emotional connections are not required for reproduction. We view it as a necessary process for survival, one that is conducted with precision." Ethan nodded. "That's what makes this experiment so, unique. You're testing whether your species can adapt to human reproductive methods, which include not only the physical aspect, but also the emotional." Zara's eyes narrowed in thought. "Indeed. The emotional component is what intrigues me most. Can emotional bonds enhance the reproductive process, or are they merely a distraction?" Ethan was silent for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling on him. He had never thought about reproduction in such stark scientific terms. For humans, it was deeply personal, often tied to love, affection, and trust. Could Zara truly understand that? "I suppose," Ethan began cautiously, "it depends on the individuals involved. For some, emotions are central to the process. For others, it's more about the biology." Zara leaned forward slightly, her violet eyes fixed on him. "And for you, Ethan? What role do emotions play in reproduction?" Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was an unexpected question, one that seemed to cut through the scientific barriers they had been maintaining. He hesitated, searching for the right words. "For me, emotions are important," he admitted. "It's about connection, trust, and understanding. Reproduction isn't just a mechanical process, it's a part of a relationship." Zara nodded as if absorbing his response. "This will be an important variable to explore. Emotional connection may be the key to the success of the experiment." Ethan's mind raced. The idea of testing human reproduction with Zara was daunting enough, but now the emotional complexities were being added into the mix. He couldn't deny the growing tension between them, an inexplicable attraction that seemed to simmer beneath the surface. "Tomorrow," Zara said, breaking the silence, "we will begin the first phase of the experiment. I appreciate your willingness to assist me in this process, Ethan." Ethan swallowed, his throat dry. "Of course. I'm here to help in any way I can." Zara stood, her presence commanding even in the simplest of gestures. "Until then, I will continue my preparations. We must be thorough if we are to succeed." As she walked away, Ethan felt a strange mix of anticipation and apprehension. This experiment was unlike anything he had ever been part of before, and it was about to test not only his scientific knowledge, but also his emotional boundaries. The following day, the weight of the experiment's true nature settled on Ethan. As he entered the lab where Zara had been preparing, he couldn't help but feel a shift in the air. There was no escaping the gravity of what was to come. He was no longer just an observer of intergalactic relations. He was now an active participant in something far more personal and, frankly, far more dangerous. Zara stood in the center of the room, her shimmering green skin glowing under the dimmed lab lights. Her expression was focused, intent, as if she were about to begin a highly delicate procedure. The translator device floated nearby, ready to bridge the gap between them. "Good morning, Ethan," Zara greeted him with a nod, her voice soft but authoritative. "I trust you've given thought to the experiment." He had, though not in the most comfortable way. His mind had raced through the night, filled with questions he couldn't answer. Questions about ethics, personal involvement, and the possible repercussions of what they were about to embark upon. Yet, the sense of duty and the curiosity that had driven him throughout his career overpowered the doubts. "I have," he replied, meeting her violet eyes. "This experiment? It's unlike anything I've ever been a part of. I need to make sure we're clear on every step." Zara inclined her head, her gaze unwavering. "Of course. Transparency is key. I'm aware this is not a simple process, and your species' methods introduce variables that we do not encounter on my planet." Ethan took a deep breath. "Right. So how do we proceed?" Zara stepped forward, her posture calm yet commanding. "The first phase is straightforward. We must establish the biological compatibility between our species before we introduce any emotional factors. This involves a series of controlled environments where we simulate various stages of human reproductive behavior." Ethan's mind flicked to the textbooks and biology lessons he had studied over the years. For humans, reproduction wasn't just mechanical, it was rooted in layers of emotions, instincts, and connections. Could Zara really understand that? "I've prepared my body to adapt to your biological needs," Zara continued. "However, I am less familiar with the emotional aspects. My people have theorized that emotional involvement could enhance the process, but we have no direct experience in this area." Ethan hesitated, realizing the enormity of what she was asking. "Zara, emotions aren't something you can just simulate. They happen naturally, over time, as people bond." "Huh?" Zara tilted her head slightly, her violet eyes narrowing as she considered his words. "Then perhaps we must allow time for that bond to develop. The experiment is not solely scientific, it's personal, and I recognize that now. My presence here will require more than just physical adaptation." There was a pause as Ethan let her words sink in. He had never imagined this level of vulnerability between them. Zara, though alien in so many ways, was opening herself up to the possibility of feeling, something her species had long considered unnecessary. "How do you see that happening?" Ethan asked cautiously. Zara stepped closer, her movements measured. "Through interaction, connection. I will not impose upon you anything beyond what is necessary for the experiment. But I am prepared to understand your species in ways that go beyond the biological." Her words hung in the air, laden with implications. Ethan realized that Zara was not just an observer of the human experience. She was now a participant, ready to learn the full scope of what it meant to be human, emotionally and physically. "There's something you need to understand, though," Ethan said, his voice softer now. "Human reproduction, it's often tied to relationships, love, trust. It's not something most people just decide to do for science." Zara regarded him with curiosity. "I see. The emotional component is central to your process, then." Exactly," Ethan nodded. "Without it, the experience would be incomplete." A silence followed, as both of them seemed to consider the implications of the next steps. Zara was not like any human woman, and yet here they stood, preparing for a process that could reshape the future of two species. The line between science and personal connection was blurring, and they both knew it. "I respect that this is a significant step for you, Ethan," Zara said, her tone softening for the first time. "I do not take this lightly, and I will approach it with the care it requires." Ethan nodded, his resolve strengthening. "We'll take it one step at a time." The rest of the day was spent reviewing the protocols Zara had developed for the experiment. The controlled environments, the simulations, and the various biological stages that needed to be tested, it was all meticulously planned. But for Ethan, there was something Zara couldn't plan for: the unpredictable nature of emotions. As the evening approached, they concluded their work for the day, but Zara's words from earlier echoed in his mind. She was prepared to explore more than just the physical. She was opening herself to the human experience in ways Ethan hadn't anticipated. And as much as he tried to keep his thoughts professional, there was an undeniable tension growing between them. a connection that was more than just curiosity. The following morning, Ethan found himself once again standing in front of Zara, this time with a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt before. Today, they would begin the actual testing phase, moving beyond theory and into practice. Zara, ever poised, looked at him with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. She was prepared, not just physically, but mentally. There was something in her gaze that suggested she was ready for more than just an experiment. And despite his initial hesitation, Ethan realized he was too. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with a quiet determination. Ethan nodded, his pulse quickening. "I am." "Oh." With that, they entered the controlled environment, a room designed to simulate various conditions for the experiment. The air felt charged, as if the room itself knew the importance of what was about to unfold. Zara stood in the center, her green skin glowing faintly under the soft lights. Her movements were fluid, almost hypnotic, as she approached Ethan. There was no rush, no urgency, just a quiet understanding between them. As she reached out, her hand gently brushed his, and in that moment, Ethan felt a connection that went beyond the experiment. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of everything that had led them to this point. The boundaries between science and personal emotion were dissolving, and Ethan knew that whatever happened next would be unlike anything he had ever experienced. The experiment was no longer just about testing reproduction, it was about testing the limits of their connection, both as scientist and subject, and as two beings from different worlds who were slowly realizing that they might have more in common than they ever thought possible. The controlled environment hummed softly with the sound of advanced technology monitoring every variable, every breath, and every movement. Ethan stood in the center of the room with Zara, his heart racing as he tried to focus on the scientific aspects of the experiment. But the charged atmosphere between them made it difficult to separate science from emotion. Zara moved gracefully, her green skin gleaming under the sterile lighting. She seemed more relaxed than Ethan had expected, as if the gravity of what they were about to do didn't faze her. For her, this was a clinical exercise, an exploration of human biology. But for Ethan, it was something much more complicated. Zara turned to face him, her violet eyes calm and inquisitive. "We will begin with the first phase," she said, her voice soothing but firm. "This will help determine the compatibility between our species. I will follow the human biological process as closely as possible." Ethan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He had read the protocols, reviewed them multiple times, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of standing in a room with an alien being about to engage in a reproduction experiment. His mind raced, trying to stay focused on the task at hand. Zara extended her hand, her movements fluid and precise. When her fingers brushed against his, it was a simple gesture, but it sent a jolt of electricity through him. He knew it was just the beginning, but already, the line between his role as a scientist and his personal feelings was starting to blur. "Your heart rate has increased," Zara observed calmly, glancing at the monitoring equipment. "Is this typical of human interaction during the reproductive process?" Ethan chuckled nervously. "It can be, but sometimes it's just nerves." Zara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I see. Your emotions are already influencing your biological responses. This is precisely what we must explore." The room was silent except for the soft beeping of the monitors. Zara moved closer to Ethan, her eyes scanning his face as if trying to understand the complexities of human emotion. For her, this was a study, an exploration of something she had never experienced before. But for Ethan, it was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain a purely scientific mindset. As part of the experiment, Zara began the process of mimicking human reproduction. Her species had no need for physical intimacy, as they reproduced through energy exchange, but Zara had adapted her physiology to mimic human methods. It was a strange and surreal experience for both of them. As the experiment progressed, Zara's body responded to Ethan's presence in ways that surprised even her. Her alien physiology, designed for precision and control, began to exhibit reactions she hadn't anticipated. Her breathing quickened, her skin temperature rose, and her pulse became erratic. All signs that she was experiencing something beyond her species' typical reproductive process. "This is unusual," Zara murmured, her voice barely audible. "I did not expect my body to react in this way."
Ooh.
Ethan stepped closer, his concern outweighing his nervousness. "Are you okay? Do we need to stop?" Zara shook her head, her eyes narrowing in concentration. "No, I am fine. It is simply unexpected. These responses are similar to what I have observed in humans, but I did not anticipate experiencing them myself." Ethan took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Maybe it's the emotional component we talked about. You said your species doesn't have emotions tied to reproduction, but humans do. Maybe your body is reacting to that." Zara considered his words for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "It is possible. If that is the case, then we are entering uncharted territory." The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as they stood together, both aware of the magnitude of what was happening. The experiment was no longer just a study in biological compatibility. It was becoming an exploration of something much deeper, something neither of them fully understood. As the first phase of the experiment concluded, Zara took a step back, her breathing still uneven. "This will require further analysis," she said, her voice returning to its usual calm tone. "But I believe we are making progress." Ethan nodded, still trying to process what had just happened. He wasn't sure how much of it was the experiment, and how much of it was something else, something personal. But one thing was clear: they were crossing boundaries that went far beyond science. "I'll need to review the data," Zara said, her eyes locking with his. "But I believe we are on the right path." Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Yeah, we'll keep moving forward." Zara stepped closer to him again, her presence calming, yet charged with an undercurrent of tension. "You've been patient with me, Ethan," she said softly. "I appreciate your willingness to explore this with me. It's not something I take lightly." Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach, a mix of emotions swirling within him. "I'm just trying to do my part," he replied, though he knew his role in this was no longer just professional. There was something about Zara that was drawing him in, something more than the science of it all. As they left the controlled environment and returned to the lab's common area, Ethan felt the weight of the situation settle on him once again. The first phase was over, but there were many more to come. And with each step, he knew the lines between their roles would blur even further. Zara turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Tomorrow we will begin the next phase. It will involve a deeper exploration of the emotional component." Ethan nodded, though his heart raced at the thought. "Right, I'll be ready." As Zara walked away, her green skin shimmering in the dim light, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this experiment was heading in a direction neither of them had fully anticipated. What had started as a scientific endeavor was becoming something far more complex, an exploration of not just biology, but connection, emotion, and perhaps even something resembling desire. He watched Zara disappear down the corridor, his mind racing with questions. How far were they willing to go, and at what point would the experiment stop being about science and start being about something else entirely? As Ethan stood alone in the lab, he realized that the answer might come sooner than he was ready for. The next day arrived with a tension that was palpable. Ethan found himself standing outside Zara's quarters, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. The previous day's events still lingered in his mind. The unexpected reactions, the closeness, the blurred lines between the experiment and their growing connection. Zara had said that the next phase would explore the emotional component, and Ethan couldn't help but wonder how that would manifest. He had been trained to approach everything scientifically, to analyze, observe, and report. But this was becoming something much more personal. He knocked gently on the door, and it slid open with a soft hiss. Zara stood inside, dressed in the same silvery fabric she had worn upon her arrival. Her long blue hair flowed over her shoulders, and her violet eyes met his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "Good morning, Ethan," she greeted him, her voice as calm and composed as ever. But there was something different in her demeanor today. Something more focused, more deliberate. "Morning, Zara," Ethan replied, stepping into the room. "Are we ready to begin?" Zara nodded, gesturing for him to sit in the nearby chair. "Today's phase will require more direct interaction between us. It is designed to assess how emotions influence the human reproductive process. We must explore the bond that forms between individuals during the process." "Oh." Ethan felt his heart rate quicken. He had known this was coming, but now that it was here, he couldn't ignore the growing connection between them. It was more than just an experiment. It was becoming something that reached deep into the core of what it meant to be human. And it seemed alien as well. Zara moved gracefully across the room, sitting down beside him. Her presence was calming, yet charged with an undercurrent of tension that Ethan couldn't ignore. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "We will begin by discussing the emotional aspects of human reproduction," she said, her voice soft but firm. "For my species, reproduction is a calculated process, devoid of emotional attachment. But I have observed that for humans, emotions play a significant role." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. "Yeah, it's about more than just the physical. There's trust, connection, sometimes love. It's not just about creating life. It's about the bond between the people involved." "Oh." Zara tilted her head slightly, as if processing his words. "And this bond, it enhances the process for your species?" Ethan hesitated, unsure how to put the complexities of human relationships into words. "I guess you could say that. The emotional connection can make the experience more meaningful, more powerful. It's not just about the act, it's about what it represents." Zara's violet eyes remained locked on his, studying him intently. "Fascinating. I believe this emotional connection may be the key to understanding the differences between our species. I wish to explore this with you, Ethan." His breath caught in his throat. The way she said it, so direct, so matter-of-fact, made his pulse race. He had known from the start that this experiment would be intimate in ways he wasn't used to, but hearing it said so plainly made everything feel even more real. I'm willing to explore it with you," he said, his voice quieter now. "But it's not something that can be forced. It has to develop naturally." Zara nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. We will take our time. The goal is not to rush, but to experience the bond as it unfolds." For the next hour, they engaged in a series of interactions designed to foster emotional connection. They spoke about their lives, their hopes, their fears. Zara, who had always been so composed, began to reveal more about herself, about her world, her people, and the pressures she faced as an ambassador for her species. "I was chosen for this mission because of my adaptability," she said, her voice soft. "But I never anticipated the emotional complexities of this experiment. My species has long abandoned the need for emotional bonds, and I believed I could do the same. But now, I find myself questioning that belief." Ethan listened intently, realizing that Zara was experiencing something entirely new. Something that was as much a part of the human experience as it was about reproduction. "I think emotions are what make us human," he said quietly. "They complicate things, sure, but they also make life worth living. Without them, we'd just be going through the motions." Zara's gaze softened, and for the first time, Ethan saw a hint of vulnerability in her eyes. "Perhaps you are right. Perhaps emotions are not a weakness, but a strength." As the day progressed, Ethan found himself growing more comfortable with Zara. They talked, laughed, and shared stories about their respective worlds. The more time they spent together, the more Ethan realized that this was no longer just about the experiment. He was forming a genuine connection with her, a bond that went beyond the boundaries of their species. By the time the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, Ethan and Zara had settled into a comfortable rhythm. They had completed the first part of the emotional phase of the experiment, but there was still much more to explore. As they stood together in the fading light, Zara turned to him, her violet eyes filled with a quiet intensity. We have made significant progress today, Ethan, but there is still more to discover. Tomorrow we will continue to explore the emotional component. Ethan nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of the unspoken feelings that lingered between them. I'll be ready. Zara smiled softly, a rare and fleeting expression that seemed to illuminate her entire being. Thank you, Ethan. Your willingness to participate in this experiment means more than you know. As she turned to leave, Ethan watched her go, his mind spinning with thoughts of what lay ahead. He had started this journey as a scientist, but now it felt like something much more personal. And as he stood alone in the dimly lit room, Ethan realized that the experiment was changing him in ways he hadn't expected. He was no longer just a researcher, he was part of something far greater, something that might just change the course of his life forever. The following day, Ethan found himself deep in thought as he prepared to meet Zara for the next phase of their experiment. Everything had shifted after the previous day. What started as a scientific study was now a journey into uncharted emotional territory. He couldn't help but wonder what further revelations would surface as they continued to explore the human side of reproduction. When he arrived at the lab, Zara was already waiting for him, her usual serene expression masking the complexities he knew were simmering beneath the surface. Today, however, there was something different in her eyes, a hint of uncertainty that Ethan hadn't seen before. "Good morning, Ethan," Zara greeted him, her voice soft but steady. "Are you ready to continue?" He nodded, though a feeling of unease tugged at the back of his mind. "Of course! How are you feeling about everything so far?" Zara's violet eyes held his for a long moment before she spoke. "I am uncertain," she admitted, a rare crack in her otherwise composed demeanor. "The emotional aspects of this experiment are more complicated than I anticipated. I did not expect to experience such strong responses, both physical and emotional." Ethan took a step closer, sensing the vulnerability in her words. "You're not alone in that. I've been feeling it too. But maybe that's the point of all this. It's not just about testing biological compatibility, but about understanding what makes us different and what makes us the same." Zara considered his words, her expression softening. "Perhaps you are right. My species has long viewed emotions as a hindrance, but I am beginning to see that they may hold more value than we once believed." Ethan smiled, relieved to see that Zara was opening up to the idea of emotions playing a crucial role in the experiment. He had always believed that emotions were at the heart of what it meant to be human, and it seemed Zara was starting to realize that too. As they began the next phase of the experiment, Zara's focus shifted back to the task at hand. This phase involved a deeper level of physical interaction, as they moved from emotional connection to exploring the physiological responses associated with human reproduction. Ethan felt a knot of tension in his stomach as they proceeded, knowing that this would be the most intimate stage yet. However, as they worked through the process, something unexpected happened. Zara's body, which had been carefully prepared for the experiment, began to exhibit signs of distress. Her breathing became labored, and her skin, normally smooth and shimmering, took on a strange, uneven texture. The monitoring equipment around them began to beep in warning, indicating that something was wrong. "Zara, are you okay?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with concern. Zara's eyes fluttered closed for a moment, and she took a shaky breath. I am not certain," she replied, her voice strained. "My body is reacting in ways I did not anticipate." Panic surged through Ethan as he rushed to the monitoring equipment, scanning the readings for any sign of what was happening. The data showed irregularities in Zara's vital signs. Her heart rate had spiked, and her temperature was fluctuating wildly. "We need to stop," Ethan said firmly, moving toward her. "This isn't safe." Zara shook her head, her breathing uneven. "No, we must continue. This is part of the experiment." "No, it's not," Ethan argued, his voice rising. "You're in pain. That's not what this is supposed to be about." For the first time, Zara's calm exterior cracked, and a flash of frustration crossed her face. "Ethan, I must complete this. It is my duty." Ethan reached out, placing a hand on her arm. "Zara, I don't care about the experiment right now. I care about you." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Zara stared at him, her violet eyes wide with surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to say something so personal. But Ethan meant every word. This wasn't just about the experiment anymore. It was about her, and about the bond they had been building. I didn't realize," Zara whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "You don't have to push yourself like this. We can take a step back. We can figure this out together." Zara's expression softened, and she nodded slowly. "Perhaps you are right. I have been too focused on the success of the experiment, and not enough on the experience itself." They paused the experiment and sat together in silence, the tension in the room slowly dissipating. Ethan could see that Zara was struggling with the emotional and physical toll of the process, and it broke his heart to think that she felt obligated to endure it for the sake of her mission. After a long moment, Zara spoke again, her voice quiet but filled with resolve. "I need to understand these emotions, Ethan. They are affecting me in ways I did not anticipate. I feel vulnerable." Ethan nodded, his heart aching for her. "That's part of being human, Zara. Emotions make us vulnerable, but they also make us stronger. You don't have to go through this alone." Zara's eyes met his, and for the first time, Ethan saw a deep sense of trust reflected in her gaze. She was opening up to him in ways that went beyond the experiment, and he knew that they had crossed a threshold that couldn't be undone. "We will continue," Zara said softly, her hand resting gently on his. "But we will do so together." Ethan nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. They had encountered unexpected complications, but they were learning, adapting, and growing together. The experiment had taken on new meaning, one that went far beyond scientific discovery. It was about connection, trust, and the realization that, despite their differences, they were more alike than they had ever imagined. As the day drew to a close, Ethan and Zara left the lab, their bond stronger than ever. They had faced a challenge that could have torn them apart, but instead it had brought them closer. And as they walked side by side through the corridors, Ethan couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning. The tension between them, while subtle, was undeniable as they continued the experiment in the days that followed. Zara was beginning to show signs of something unexpected, something beyond the scope of the scientific parameters they had set. Her alien physiology was adapting, but it wasn't just about biological compatibility anymore. There was a deeper, emotional layer emerging that neither of them could ignore. Ethan noticed it in the way Zara interacted with him, how she no longer approached the experiment as a detached observer. There was a softness in her gaze, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. He too felt the shift in their relationship. What had started as a mission of discovery was quickly evolving into something more personal, more intimate. One evening, after a particularly intense session, they sat together in the common area, the silence between them filled with unspoken thoughts. The experiment had moved into a phase where emotions and physical responses were deeply intertwined, and Ethan could see the toll it was taking on Zara. She sat across from him, her posture unusually relaxed, her violet eyes watching him closely. "I have been thinking about what you said," she began, her voice quieter than usual. "About vulnerability, about how emotions are an integral part of the human experience." Ethan nodded, sensing that this was more than just a casual conversation. "Yeah, it's something that's difficult to quantify or control. It just happens." Zara's gaze dropped to the floor, and for a moment she seemed lost in thought. "I was chosen for this mission because of my ability to remain detached, to approach this experiment with logic and precision. But now I find myself questioning whether that was the right approach." Ethan's heart ached for her. He knew how much pressure she was under to succeed, how much was riding on the outcome of the experiment. But he also knew that this wasn't just about fulfilling her mission anymore. "You don't have to be perfect, Zara," he said softly. "This experiment was never going to be simple. We're navigating something that's bigger than either of us. It's okay to feel whatever it is you're feeling. D Zara's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of fear behind her calm exterior. I was not prepared for this, Ethan. I thought I could control every aspect of the experiment, but now I realize that emotions are far more powerful than I anticipated. Ethan moved closer, his hand reaching out to rest gently on hers. That's part of being human, Zara. We don't always have control over our emotions, but that's what makes us who we are. It's messy, but it's real. For a long moment, they sat in silence, their hands intertwined, the weight of the experiment pressing down on them both. Zara's skin, normally cool and smooth, felt warmer beneath his touch, and Ethan could feel the subtle tremble in her fingers. She was struggling with something internal, something that went beyond the physical parameters of their mission. Finally, Zara spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I have never felt this before. These emotions, they are foreign to me. I do not know how to navigate them. Ethan squeezed her hand gently, offering her a small smile. You don't have to navigate them alone. We're in this together. Zara's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. Together, she repeated, as if testing the word on her tongue. The turning point in their relationship came later that evening. They had completed another round of the experiment, this time focusing on the emotional bond that was steadily growing between them. As they sat together, exhaustion tugging at the edges of their consciousness, Zara leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder. A small, seemingly insignificant gesture, but one that spoke volumes. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. Her body, once foreign and strange to him, now felt familiar, comforting. It wasn't just about the experiment anymore. It was about the connection they had forged through shared vulnerability and trust. I never expected this, Zara murmured, her voice laced with something Ethan couldn't quite place. Was it relief? Or fear? Neither did I, Ethan admitted, his heart pounding in his chest. But I think maybe this was supposed to happen. Zara lifted her head to look at him, her violet eyes searching his face for answers. What do you mean? I mean, this isn't just about science anymore. It's about us, about what we've discovered together. For a moment, Zara was silent, her gaze locked on his. Then slowly she nodded. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps this was meant to be. The air between them shifted, charged with an energy that neither of them could ignore. Zara moved closer, her breath soft against his skin. And for the first time, Ethan saw her not as the alien ambassador sent to Earth for an experiment, but as someone who had become deeply important to him. Someone he cared about, not just as a participant in the study, but as a person. Their lips met in a tentative kiss, a gentle exploration of the connection that had been building between them for so long. It wasn't part of the experiment, but it felt right. It felt like the natural progression of everything they had shared, both the science and the emotions that had bound them together. When they finally pulled away, Zara's cheeks were flushed, and Ethan could see the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. That was unexpected, she said softly, her voice tinged with awe. Ethan chuckled, his heart still racing. Yeah, but I think it's part of the experiment too, just not the one we planned. Zara nodded, her violet eyes shining with something new. Hope, perhaps. Or maybe it was understanding. You are right, Ethan. This experiment is not just about biology. It is about connection. And I believe we are only beginning to understand what that truly means. As they sat together, wrapped in the warmth of their newfound bond, Ethan realized that the experiment had indeed taken a turn. It was no longer just about testing reproduction. It was about exploring the depth of human emotion, the complexity of relationships, and the undeniable truth that sometimes the most important discoveries were the ones you didn't expect. Days passed, and the bond between Ethan and Zara grew deeper than either of them had anticipated. What had started as an experiment had evolved into something far more complex, something personal and intimate. Their connection had become undeniable, and the emotional aspects of their interactions were now as significant as the scientific data they were collecting. But with that closeness came new complications. One evening, after another round of testing and emotional exploration, Zara began to experience strange physical symptoms. At first they were subtle: an increase in body temperature, slight fluctuations in her vital signs, but over time they became more pronounced. Her normally serene expression was marred by confusion and discomfort, and her skin, usually smooth and cool to the touch, grew warmer and more sensitive. Ethan noticed it immediately. They had been sitting together discussing the latest data when Zara suddenly stopped mid-sentence, her hand instinctively moving to her abdomen. "Zara, are you okay?" Ethan asked, his voice laced with concern. Zara's brow furrowed, and she shook her head slowly. I am not certain. Something feels different." Ethan's pulse quickened, a sense of dread creeping into his chest. Different how? Zara stood, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were trying to understand what was happening inside her body. "My physiology is changing," she said quietly. "It is reacting to something unexpected." Panic flashed through Ethan's mind. Had they pushed the experiment too far? Had their emotional and physical connection triggered a response that neither of them had anticipated? His mind raced with possibilities, but none of them seemed to provide a clear answer. "Let's get you to the medical bay," Ethan said, standing and guiding her gently toward the door. "We need to run some tests." Zara nodded, her expression calm despite the obvious discomfort she was feeling. Together, they made their way to the medical bay, where Ethan quickly set up the necessary equipment to monitor her vital signs and conduct a more thorough examination. As the data streamed in, Ethan's heart sank. Zara's body was exhibiting signs of early-stage gestation, a biological process that was entirely foreign to her species. Her cells were rapidly dividing, adapting in ways that defied explanation. Somehow, despite the differences in their species, Zara had conceived. "Zara," Ethan said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "I think you're pregnant." Zara's eyes widened, her usual composure slipping for a brief moment. "Pregnant? But how is that possible?" Ethan shook his head, struggling to process the implications of what they had discovered. "I don't know. This shouldn't be possible. Our species are so different, but somehow it happened." "Oh." Zara placed a hand on her abdomen, her expression unreadable. "This was not part of the experiment. We never intended for this to happen." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. "I know, but we have to figure out what this means, both for you and for the child." The word child hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Neither of them had anticipated this outcome. And yet here they were, faced with a reality that neither science nor logic could fully explain. Zara took a deep breath, her violet eyes locking with Ethan's. "This changes everything." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "Yeah, it does." They spent the next few hours running more tests, trying to gather as much information as they could about the pregnancy and what it meant for both Zara and the hybrid child she was carrying. The data was astounding. Zara's body was adapting in ways that had never been observed before, adjusting to the demands of human gestation while maintaining her alien physiology. But with that adaptation came risks. As the pregnancy progressed, Zara's body began to show signs of strain. Her normally stable vital signs fluctuated wildly, and her energy levels dropped significantly. The pregnancy was taxing her system in ways that neither of them had expected, and it became clear that they would need to take extra precautions to ensure her safety. "I don't know if your body can handle this," Ethan said one evening as they sat together, reviewing the latest test results. "This pregnancy is putting a lot of stress on your system. We need to be careful." Zara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I understand the risks, but I believe this child is important, not just for us, but for our species. This is a unique opportunity to understand the compatibility between our worlds." Ethan's heart ached at her words. He knew she was right. This pregnancy represented something monumental, something that could change the course of their species' interactions forever. But he couldn't shake the fear that Zara was putting herself in danger for the sake of the experiment. "We'll keep monitoring you closely," Ethan said, his voice filled with determination. "If anything feels wrong, you have to tell me. We can't take any chances." Zara smiled softly, her hand resting on his. "I trust you, Ethan. I know you will do everything you can to keep us safe." Ethan squeezed her hand gently, his mind racing with the possibilities of what lay ahead. The pregnancy had changed the course of the experiment entirely. And now they were venturing into completely uncharted territory. But despite the uncertainty, there was one thing he knew for sure. They were in this together. As the weeks passed, Zara's condition became more stable, though the pregnancy continued to challenge her body in ways neither of them could have predicted. Ethan remained by her side every step of the way, monitoring her progress and ensuring that both she and the child were safe. And through it all, their bond deepened. They were no longer just scientist and subject, no longer just participants in an experiment. They were partners, navigating the unknown together, bound by a shared experience that had changed them both forever. As Zara's due date approached, Ethan couldn't help but feel a mix of anticipation and fear. What would the child be like? Would it be more human or more like Zara? Would their species truly be compatible in the long term? Or was this just a rare, unpredictable occurrence? There were no easy answers, but one thing was clear. The child they were bringing into the world was a symbol of something far greater than either of them. It was a bridge between two species, a testament to the power of connection, and a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected outcomes were the ones that mattered most. The weeks passed in a blur of monitoring, analysis, and growing anticipation. Ethan watched over Zara carefully, ensuring that every step of the pregnancy was accounted for. Her body had adapted in ways neither of them could have imagined, handling the process of human gestation with remarkable resilience, but the strain was still evident. Each day, Ethan worried about the toll it was taking on her, and how the birth would unfold. Despite the tension, there were moments of tenderness between them, quiet exchanges where Zara would place her hand on her growing belly, and Ethan would marvel at the life they had created. It was a connection that transcended the scientific parameters of their mission, an emotional bond that had evolved from necessity into something far more profound. And then the day arrived. It started quietly. Zara had been resting when she felt the first pangs, a gentle ripple of discomfort that alerted her to what was about to happen. At first, she didn't say anything, allowing the sensation to pass, thinking it was just another adjustment in her ever-changing body. But soon, the discomfort intensified, and she knew the time had come. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice strained. "It's happening." Ethan's heart raced as he looked up from the monitoring equipment. Zara's expression was calm, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her violet eyes, something he had rarely seen before. Without hesitation, Ethan sprang into action, activating the medical protocols they had prepared for this moment. "You're going to be okay," he said, more to reassure himself than Zara. "We've prepared for this. Everything is going to be fine." "Bah!" Zara nodded, her hand instinctively moving to her abdomen. "I trust you, Ethan." As the medical team arrived and began setting up the necessary equipment, Ethan stayed by Zara's side, holding her hand, his mind racing with a mixture of excitement and fear. This was uncharted territory, a human-alien hybrid birth. No one knew what to expect, not even the most advanced medical experts. But Ethan knew that whatever happened, they would face it together. Hours passed in a blur of medical procedures, as Zara's body worked through the complex process of labor. Her breathing became labored, and beads of sweat formed on her smooth green skin. The monitors beeped softly in the background, tracking every fluctuation in her vital signs, every change in the baby's status. Ethan remained by her side the entire time, his heart aching as he watched her endure the physical strain. He wished he could do more, anything to ease her discomfort. But all he could offer was his presence, his support. "You're doing great," he whispered, squeezing her hand gently. "You're almost there." Zara's eyes met his, filled with a mix of exhaustion and determination. I can feel it. The child. It's close. Minutes later, the moment they had been waiting for arrived. With one final effort, Zara delivered the child, a small, fragile being with a perfect blend of human and alien features. The room fell into stunned silence as the medical team carefully lifted the baby, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. The child's skin was a soft, iridescent green, with faint hints of human traits. Small, delicate hands, tiny fingers and toes, and a face that held the promise of two worlds coming together. The baby let out a soft, plaintive cry, and Ethan felt his heart swell with emotion. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Zara, exhausted but filled with a quiet strength, looked toward the baby, her expression softening as she reached out. "Let me see. Let me hold our child." The medical team handed the baby to Zara, and Ethan watched as she cradled the tiny being in her arms. Her violet eyes filled with an emotion Ethan had rarely seen in her. Pure, unfiltered love. The baby quieted almost immediately, nestling into Zara's embrace, its small eyes fluttering open to reveal a stunning mix of violet and deep brown, a combination of both parents. Ethan could hardly believe what he was seeing. A perfect blend of human and alien, a living embodiment of the experiment that had brought them together. "Ethan," Zara whispered, her voice filled with awe. "Look at them!" Ethan leaned in closer, his breath catching in his throat as he gazed at their child. "They're perfect," he said, his voice barely audible. "Absolutely perfect." For a long moment, the room was filled with nothing but the soft sounds of the baby's breathing and the quiet hum of the medical equipment. Ethan and Zara were lost in the miracle of the life they had created. The bond between them now solidified in the form of the tiny being resting in Zara's arms. But as the initial joy began to settle, the reality of their situation started to creep back in. This child was not just a symbol of their love. It was also a scientific anomaly, a hybrid of two species that had never been known to reproduce together. And with that came a host of unknowns. "What happens now?" Ethan asked softly, his gaze still fixed on the baby. Zara's expression grew thoughtful as she held the child close. "Now we must protect them. There will be many who seek to study this child, to understand how it was possible. But we cannot let them become a mere subject of scientific curiosity." "Oh," Ethan nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of what she was saying. "You're right. We'll need to be careful." For the next few hours, the medical team continued their analysis, ensuring that both Zara and the baby were healthy. The results were astounding. The child was in perfect health, a true hybrid of human and Altharan physiology, with the potential to bridge the gap between their two species in ways no one had ever thought possible. But with that potential came risks. As word of the birth spread through the facility, whispers of the child's significance began to circulate. Ethan could feel the tension growing, the curiosity and anticipation of those who wanted to study the baby. He knew that they had created something extraordinary, but he also knew that they would need to protect their child from those who saw them only as an experiment. Later that night, after the medical team had cleared them to leave the lab, Ethan and Zara sat together in their quarters, the baby sleeping soundly in Zara's arms. The weight of everything they had been through hung in the air, but for the first time in a long while, there was also a sense of peace. "We did it," Zara whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "We created something extraordinary." Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with love for both Zara and their child. "Yeah, we did. And whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As they sat together watching their child sleep, Ethan knew that their journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, obstacles to overcome, and questions to answer. But in that moment, all that mattered was the bond they had created, the love that had grown between them, and the life they had brought into the world. And whatever the future held, they would face it as a family. The days following the birth of their child were filled with a delicate balance between joy and apprehension. Ethan and Zara were in awe of the little being they had brought into the world, a child who represented the union of two different species, but they were also painfully aware of the growing interest from the scientific community. At first, the interest was subtle. Questions from curious colleagues, requests for additional data on the baby's health, and occasional visitors to check on Zara's condition. But soon, the attention became more intense. Higher-ranking officials from Vanguard Technologies began to make regular appearances, expressing an interest in studying the child's development in more depth. Ethan had anticipated this to some extent, but the reality of it hit harder than he expected. They were being watched closely. The child wasn't just seen as a baby, but as a subject of immense scientific value. Ethan could sense the pressure mounting, the unspoken demand to allow more invasive tests, to share the child with those who wanted to unlock the secrets of hybrid biology. Zara, too, felt the weight of their scrutiny. She had always been calm and composed, but now, as a mother, she was protective in ways she hadn't expected. Her instincts as an ambassador for her species conflicted with her new role as a parent, and it was clear that she wasn't willing to let their child become a mere scientific experiment. One evening, as they sat together in their quarters, Ethan could see the concern etched on Zara's face. She held their child close, her violet eyes troubled. "They are becoming more persistent," she said quietly, her voice tense. "Every day they ask for more. They want to run more tests, gather more data. They want to study our child as if they are nothing more than a specimen." Ethan nodded, his own frustration simmering just beneath the surface. "I know. I've been trying to hold them off, but it's getting harder. They see our child as the key to understanding interspecies reproduction, something that could change everything." Zara's grip on the baby tightened slightly. "But this is not just about science, Ethan. This is about our child. I will not allow them to treat our child as an experiment." Ethan felt a surge of protectiveness rise within him. He had been caught between his loyalty to the scientific mission and his love for Zara and their child. But now the choice was becoming clearer. The child's safety and well-being came first, no matter the cost. "We need to leave," Ethan said, his voice firm. Zara looked up at him, her eyes widening in surprise. "Leave? You mean leave the facility?" Ethan nodded. "Yes. We can't stay here anymore. If we do, they'll keep pushing, keep demanding more. And eventually, they won't take no for an answer. We have to go somewhere safe, somewhere they can't reach us." Zara was silent for a moment, her mind processing the gravity of his words. Leaving the facility meant leaving behind everything they had known, everything they had worked for. It meant cutting ties with the experiment, with Vanguard Technologies, and possibly with their home worlds. But as she looked down at their child, peacefully sleeping in her arms, she knew that Ethan was right. Their priority was no longer the experiment, it was their family. "I agree," Zara said softly, her voice resolute. "We will leave. But where will we go?" Ethan had already been thinking about this. He had contacts outside of Vanguard Technologies, people who could help them disappear for a while, who could provide them with the resources they needed to stay off the radar. It wouldn't be easy, but he knew it was the only option. "I know some people," Ethan said. "I can make the arrangements. But we have to act fast. If they suspect that we're planning to leave, they'll tighten security around us." Zara nodded, her resolve strengthening. "Then we will leave as soon as we can. Our child's safety comes first." For the next few days, Ethan and Zara made careful preparations. They gathered what little they could carry, including the essentials for the baby, and kept a low profile, avoiding any unnecessary attention. Ethan reached out to his contacts, arranging for transportation and a safe house where they could stay hidden. The tension in the facility was palpable, and it seemed that the officials were becoming more insistent with each passing day. They wanted to schedule more tests, more evaluations, and it was clear that they were growing suspicious of Ethan and Zara's reluctance to comply. Finally, the night of their escape arrived. Ethan had managed to secure a vehicle through one of his contacts, parked just outside the facility. The plan was simple: slip out unnoticed, using the less guarded entrance near the medical bay, and make their way to the safe house under the cover of darkness. Zara held their child close as they quietly made their way through the corridors of the facility. The baby was calm, sensing the tension, but trusting in the safety of its mother's embrace. Ethan led the way, his heart pounding in his chest as they moved swiftly and silently through the maze of hallways. When they reached the exit, Ethan breathed a sigh of relief. The door was unlocked, just as his contact had promised. They were almost free. But as they stepped outside, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. "Stop right there!" a voice commanded, sharp and authoritative. Ethan spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. A group of security personnel stood at the entrance, their weapons drawn, and behind them was one of the facility's high-ranking officials, the very person who had been pushing for more invasive tests on their child. "You're not going anywhere," the official said coldly, stepping forward. "You've become a security risk. We cannot allow you to leave with that child." Zara's eyes narrowed, her protective instincts kicking into overdrive. "This child is not your experiment," she said, her voice steady but filled with warning. "We are leaving." The official shook his head, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "I'm afraid that's not your decision to make. That child belongs to science. And you belong to us." Ethan's blood boiled at the man's words. He took a step forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "You're not taking our child. We're leaving, and there's nothing you can do to stop us." The official raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by Ethan's defiance. "Oh, really? And how do you plan to accomplish that?" Before Ethan could respond, Zara acted. With a speed and precision that left the guards momentarily stunned, Zara raised her hand, and a pulse of energy shot from her palm, sending the security personnel stumbling backward. The official's smirk disappeared in an instant, replaced by shock as he realized that Zara wasn't just a subject of study. She was a force to be reckoned with. "We are leaving," Zara repeated, her voice calm but filled with authority. "And if you try to stop us again, I will ensure that you regret it." With that, Zara and Ethan turned and hurried toward the waiting vehicle, the baby still safe in Zara's arms. The security team, too disoriented to react, made no further attempts to stop them. As they drove away from the facility, Ethan couldn't help but glance over at Zara, a mixture of awe and gratitude swelling in his chest. She had protected them, protected their family, and now they were free. For now, the night sky stretched endlessly above them as Ethan drove through the remote countryside, his mind racing with the events that had just unfolded. Beside him, Zara held their child close, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. They had escaped the facility, but they both knew that their battle was far from over. There would be consequences for what they had done, and the forces they had left behind wouldn't give up easily. "We're safe for now," Ethan said, glancing over at Zara. "But we need to stay on the move. They'll come after us." Zara nodded, her violet eyes fixed on the horizon. "We will be ready. We have our child, and we will protect them." Ethan reached over and took her hand, the warmth of her skin a comforting reminder that they were in this together. The bond they had forged, first through science, then through love, was now unbreakable. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. They drove in silence for several more hours, the tension slowly giving way to a quiet determination. As dawn began to break, casting a soft golden light over the landscape, they reached their destination, a secluded safe house hidden deep in the woods, provided by one of Ethan's most trusted contacts. The house was small but sturdy, its wooden exterior blending into the surrounding trees. It had been stocked with everything they would need for the immediate future: food, supplies, and the technology required to monitor any activity from Vanguard Technologies. As they stepped inside, Zara cradled their child gently in her arms, her eyes scanning the interior of the house. It wasn't much, but it would be their home for the time being, a place where they could regroup and plan their next steps. "We'll be safe here," Ethan said, setting down the bags they had brought with them, "at least for a while." Zara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you, Ethan. I know this hasn't been easy." Ethan shook his head, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "I'd do it all again, Zara. You and our child mean everything to me." For the next few days, they settled into a new routine. It was a strange blend of normalcy and constant vigilance, caring for their child, who was thriving despite the chaos that surrounded them, while also keeping a close eye on any signs that Vanguard Technologies might be closing in on them. But no matter how much they tried to stay focused, the reality of what they had created, of the life they had brought into the world, was never far from their minds. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch of the safe house, watching their child sleep peacefully in a makeshift cradle, Zara spoke quietly, her voice filled with both awe and uncertainty. "Our child is unique," she said, her gaze distant. "They are a bridge between two worlds, human and Altharan. What will the future hold for them?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. But what I do know is that we'll give them the best life we can. We'll protect them, teach them, and help them navigate whatever challenges come their way." Zara turned to face him, her violet eyes searching his. "Do you think they will ever be accepted, truly accepted, by either world?" Ethan hesitated, knowing that the question was complex. Their child was a symbol of hope, but also of something that many might fear or misunderstand. The world wasn't always kind to those who were different, and their child would undoubtedly face challenges that neither of them could fully predict. "I think it's going to take time," Ethan said carefully, "but I also think that what we've done, what we've created, has the potential to change things. Maybe not right away, but eventually." Zara nodded slowly, her hand resting gently on their child's small head. "I hope you are right, Ethan. For their sake, I hope you are right." For the next several weeks, Ethan and Zara remained in the safe house, continuing to care for their child while staying vigilant for any signs of pursuit. There were a few close calls, drones flying overhead, a suspicious vehicle parked near the edge of the woods, but each time they managed to stay one step ahead. It wasn't an easy existence, but they had each other, and that was enough. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky filled with shades of pink and orange, Zara turned to Ethan, her expression thoughtful. "I have been thinking about what comes next," she said softly. "We cannot stay hidden forever." Ethan looked at her, sensing that there was something more behind her words. "What do you mean?" Zara glanced down at their child, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Our child is a miracle, Ethan, a symbol of what is possible when two worlds come together. But they deserve more than a life spent in hiding. We need to find a way to ensure their safety, yes, but also their future." Ethan nodded, understanding what she was saying. "You're right. We need to think long-term." They sat in silence for a moment, both of them contemplating the enormity of what lay ahead. The child they had created wasn't just a product of an experiment. It was a living being with a future that extended beyond the walls of the safe house. And that future needed to be protected. "We'll find a way," Ethan said finally, his voice filled with determination. "We'll figure out how to keep them safe, and we'll make sure they have the life they deserve." Zara smiled softly, a rare expression of hope crossing her face. "I believe in us, Ethan. We have faced so much already, and yet here we are, together." As the days turned into weeks, Ethan and Zara began to make plans for what would come next. They reached out to allies, people they could trust to help them navigate the complex political landscape of both Earth and Althara. Slowly, they began to build a network of support, laying the groundwork for a future where their child could grow up free from the fear of being hunted or exploited. But even as they worked to secure their child's future, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something much larger. The world was changing, and their child, the first human Altharan hybrid, was at the center of that change. One evening, as they sat together under the stars, Zara leaned into Ethan's side, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you ever wonder what the future holds for us?" she asked quietly. Ethan wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. "All the time," he admitted. "But whatever it is, we'll face it together. We've come this far, and I don't plan on letting anything tear us apart." Zara smiled, her eyes closing as she listened to the steady rhythm of Ethan's heartbeat. "Together," she whispered. As they sat beneath the stars, their child sleeping soundly nearby, Ethan knew that their journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, obstacles they couldn't yet foresee. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. They had each other, they had their child, and they had a future worth fighting for. Whatever came next, they would face it as a family.